A bizarre court-martial, mysterious African ruins, an emissary to the Mongols. Today's episode is all about using real history in your RPG campaigns.
Welcome to dissects.com tabletop RPG show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is dissects.com tabletop RPG show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. As always, I have an awesome interview coming right up. But first, if you could support the show in some way, I would greatly appreciate it. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to put a podcast together like this. So if you could like, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. Those things really help the show out. They help more people find the show, and that's really exactly what I need. If you could do one of those things, I would greatly appreciate it. Also, if you would consider supporting the show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks. If you were to join the ranks of my other patrons, that would be so awesome. All right, but enough of all that. Here's today's interview. My guest today is the writer and game designer behind the Molten Sulfur blog, Tristan Zimmerman. Tristan, it is always a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Oh, it's always a delight to be here, Matt. Thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, no problem. And as regular listeners by now, I hope know kind of our format, that we talk about three things from history, literature, or folklore that you have blogged about over at Molten Sulfur, because you believe that history and the real world can provide kind of a really good foundation for jumping points off into RPG campaigns. Isn't that right?
Yep. I am a big fan of drawing from real history, real folklore, and I think that your adventures feel richer and more vibrant and more alive and more interesting as a consequence. And I really genuinely believe that your players can tell the difference when you're drawing from the original stuff. And plus, it's just a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, learning about some of these historical events has been fascinating to me. I know, of course, I love history. I love learning about these things. So it's been fantastic. But also, you have a project coming up, right? The Shanty Hunters?
Yeah, so I have been working for several years now on a tabletop RPG called Shanty Hunters. It is a game about collecting magical sea shanties in the year 1880. And it's super fun. And it's going to be coming to Kickstarter on November 2nd. If you want to learn more about Shanty Hunters, I strongly encourage you to head over to moltensulfur.com, where there is just a nice little Shanty Hunters banner across the top, or you can go to tinyurl.com/shanty-rpg. Probably safe to assume both of those will be in the show notes, where you can learn more about the excellent shanty collecting, magic, weird sailing ship, historically grounded 1880, vaguely Call of Cthulhu-esque, but absolutely no Cthulhu nonsense RPG that is Shanty Hunters. You can learn more about it. You can sign up to be notified when the Kickstarter goes live, and that should be really cool.
Awesome. And yes, I will put the links in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody listening can head over there and check that out. All right. Well, like I said, we have kind of a formula here. Since you are a regular guest, we are going to talk about some mysterious ruins in Africa. We're going to talk about an emissary to the Mongols. But first, we're going to talk about a bizarre court-martial. Why don't you set that up for us quickly?
All right, so the story is wild. This occurs in the year 1799, and it is part of the French Wars of Revolution. Don't worry, this isn't going to be a military history story, but the Wars of Revolution are really important context here, because this is occurring in the decades following the French Revolution. France is governed by the First Republic, and therefore nominally by the people. King Louis is dead, shortened by a head by the glorious revolutionaries fighting for democracy. We're recording this episode on Independence Day weekend, so just excuse me if I get a little excited. And the crowned heads of Europe are not happy about this state of affairs. They are all terrified that this poisonous idea of democracy, of people governing themselves by elections, that it will spread to their countries and they will be dethroned. And chief among these worried monarchies is Britain. And Britain is at war more or less continuously with France through this entire period. France, meanwhile, is having to wage more or less continual war, not just against Britain, but against all these other crowned heads of Europe who are all individually fighting on again, off again wars with the French First Republic. And the noteworthy one for us today is King Ferdinand of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Now, technically, I will point out the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies does not exist yet. He is King Ferdinand the Fourth of Naples, and also King Ferdinand the Third of Sicily. Naples and Sicily are two separate kingdoms, which simply coincidentally happen to have the exact same person serving as their king. But functionally, by this point, they are one kingdom, and in fact, later in his life, Ferdinand will join them and create the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Now, Ferdinand was a relative of King Louis, so you might not be surprised to learn that he is upset by the shortening of his reign, and is among the people who's waging periodic on-again, off-again wars against the French First Republic. The French don't take kindly to this, as you might imagine, and they invade. They push down the Italian peninsula to go after to go after King Ferdinand. Now, King Ferdinand has an ace up his sleeve, and that ace is none other than Admiral Horatio Nelson. Admiral Horatio Nelson is the British hero of the Battle of the Nile, which effectively ends France's naval power over the Mediterranean. He's this one-eyed, one-armed battle axe of a human being. He is generally considered to be the greatest naval commander in human history. And as I have learned since writing that, when you say that out loud, a lot of French and Korean folks get real grumpy at you, but I'm not saying that he is the greatest. That depends entirely on what your context for greatness is, which is arbitrary. But he is generally considered to be the greatest naval commander in human history, and I will stand by that. Nelson, fresh off his victory over the French forces at the Battle of the Nile, has been assigned by the British Admiralty to help out King Ferdinand of Naples/Sicily. It does not go well. The French are a land power. Admiral Nelson is, of course, a sea power. And the French are able to take Naples by land. And Admiral Nelson has to work with a Neapolitan Commodore named Francesco Caracciolo in order to evacuate the court of King Ferdinand from Naples across the water to Sicily under cover of darkness before the French can take the city. And the French take the city, and a group of Neapolitan rebels with French support establish a republic in Naples. It is a big win for democracy. It's a big win for the little guy. But it is not a big win for King Ferdinand. It is not a big win for Admiral Nelson. And it is a complicated state of affairs for Commodore Francesco Caracciolo, who is now where we are going to turn our attention. Caracciolo is he's a career Navy man in the Navy of King Ferdinand, and he has fought alongside Admiral Nelson in the past. He has a reputation for recklessness. He has a reputation for being, headstrong, first to fight sort of guy. He's a real kind of a General Patton sort of figure in at least in an American World War II context. But he also is a Neapolitan patriot, and he has a lot of property in Naples, that he is real concerned that the new republic, the government of the new Republic of Naples, is probably going to confiscate and sell off in order to raise some money. And so he gets permission from King Ferdinand to stay behind in Naples and look after his property. He then immediately goes over to the new government and says, "Hey, I have a lot of experience with naval affairs. Wouldn't you like me to run your harbor defense? Wouldn't you just appoint me the admiral in your little republic's navy, and I will command all the gunboats that are guarding your harbor here against the villainous King Ferdinand." I haven't really introduced King Ferdinand because he's a wild figure during this weird story. King Ferdinand is heavily inbred, and as a consequence, is a weird dude. His oldest brother was mad, like absolutely crazy. His next oldest brother was mentally handicapped in some way or another. So when Ferdinand was growing up, his parents and governors and so forth did not want to impose any restrictions on Ferdinand's mind for fear that it might tax him and he might wind up like his older brothers. So he grew up. Sorry?
That never goes well.
Oh, absolutely. And this guy's going to grow up to be king, right? So this is someone who will never have any idea that there's any limits on human behavior.
Yeah.
And so he grows up kind of exactly like you would expect. He loved to curse in Italian. He loved to poop in front of people. And I have to note, this is not like some sort of weird custom. Like, no, man, he just liked to poop in front of people. That was his thing. He hosted enormous hunts with just thousands of people to beat the bush and drive the animals out. He did not really do anything to run the kingdom of the two Sicilies. Most of that actual work he left to his wife, a Habsburg, who was just much more capable than he was. So anyway, we've got Ferdinand. We've got Caracciolo. I'll also say about Nelson, because he's another real important figure in this story. In addition to being a war hero, grievously wounded twice in action on behalf of king and country. Once in the eye, he has one dead eye in his face, and that wound also inflicted some kind of grievous facial scarring. And the other, he lost his arm. He is one of those kinds of people who knows exactly how good he is. Because he's good, right? He's the best. And he's really smart, and he's smart enough to know how good he is. So he is arrogant. He is a glory hound, but he is brilliant. His men love him because he looks after them. He brings them glory. He does not throw away their lives for absolutely no good reason, which, boy, given the time period we're talking about, is pretty high praise. He makes them wealthy because this is a period where if you manage to capture a warship in battle, the Admiralty will then pay out the victorious crew the value of that warship, So if you get warships are very expensive. If you win a battle and you get paid your share of the value of that warship because the Admiralty just bought it from your crew, like, congratulations, all of a sudden you're wealthy. Well done. So his men loved him, and he loved his men. He would always go to bat for them, but he was an asshole. So you win some, you lose some. He was also having an affair with the wife of the British ambassador to the court of King Ferdinand. So you have the King Ferdinand, of course, he has a British ambassador to his court, Lord Hamilton, and his wife, Lady Hamilton, is just this incredible figure in her own right. She was born dirt poor, the daughter of a blacksmith in a British society that was obsessed with class and station. But she managed to conceal her origins and claw her way up the social ladder by making friends in the right places and ultimately marrying the right guy and, going to the right social functions, and even became a celebrity in her own right when she appeared in a series of what were at the time famous paintings by artist George Romney. She was George Romney's muse. This was one of her very intentional and deliberate steps towards rising towards prominence and wealth and comfort, was to act as the muse of George Romney. And so he painted her in a bunch of what were at the time really famous paintings. So Lady Hamilton here, Emma, Lady Hamilton, is this fascinating figure in her own right, and is now having an affair with Admiral Nelson. So we have all of this going on. This is all to set the stage to kind of illustrate these wild characters, and then the inevitable happens, and King Ferdinand retakes Naples. Right, the French support was not enough, and King Ferdinand takes Naples via a ground assault. So it wasn't even a naval assault, right? Having Admiral Nelson there, I'm sure, was handy, and Admiral Nelson sure liked being there because he got to sleep with Lady Hamilton. Unclear how Lord Hamilton felt about the whole thing. But Naples is retaken, and Francesco Caracciolo, remember Francesco Caracciolo, the Commodore? He is found in the countryside. He has fled. But no, he is caught, he is captured, he is brought back to Naples. His hair is gray. He has this long beard that he has grown, probably because he's had a really rough last few months, one would imagine. And he's going to be court-martialed because, yeah, man, like for all that I, as a proud supporter of democracy, say, yeah, man, like when given the choice between serving your king and serving the people, serve the people. But nonetheless, he did, in fact, betray his king and his command and his commission. So, like, yeah, court-martial, this is how things go. King Ferdinand is not on site. King Ferdinand is still back in Sicily. The person who is on site, the ranking officer in Naples, is Admiral Nelson. Admiral Nelson is there aboard his flagship, HMS Foudroyant. It is a French name because it is a captured French ship. Presumably some lucky British crew all got rich in the process of capturing her. And Nelson immediately convenes a court-martial, right? Like, here is Caracciolo. He's starving. He's got this long gray beard. He's in chains on the deck. No wasted time. Immediately convene a court-martial. And Nelson gathers 6 Neapolitan officers to serve as judges in this court-martial. And Nelson will be the lead judge. They hold a quick trial. Caracciolo gives his defense. We have varying descriptions of what his defense was. Different people have given different descriptions that have come down to us. Probably the best known is his argument that since King Ferdinand abandoned Naples, fled Naples in the middle of the night, that meant he abandoned, that the king abandoned Caracciolo. So Caracciolo didn't abandon the king because he was already abandoned. Of course, Caracciolo was one of the people who was helping the king flee Naples. So that doesn't really carry a lot of water to me. Anyway, Nelson asks these Neapolitan officers, okay, vote. What do we do with this guy? 3 of them vote for execution, right? And to be clear, I want to be real clear on this. Caracciolo is guilty, right? Caracciolo is guilty as sin. There's no ambiguity here. Like, he definitely did the treason that he has been accused of. So 3 of the Neapolitan officers vote immediately, just execute him, kill him right now. 3 of them vote for hold the phone. We do not know what King Ferdinand wants yet. Let's hold out. Let's hold out for until we find out what the king wants done. So Admiral Nelson then casts the deciding vote, and he votes for execution. And Caracciolo is dragged off HMS Foudroyant to a Neapolitan warship, the Minerva. And aboard the Minerva, within a few hours, Caracciolo is hanged. Now, there are a number of irregularities here that really make this whole court-martial affair really interesting. And I'll get to those in a second, but I just want to finish the story of Caracciolo first. So that night in Nelson's wardroom, Nelson and all of his British officers are dining together. They're eating dinner. And Lady Hamilton is there. She is also dining in the wardroom with Nelson and his officers. And word comes that Caracciolo has been hanged and that he is dead. And Lady Hamilton raises a toast to dead traitors. And what's really interesting about that is nobody else in the wardroom is enthusiastic, right? Everybody else is kind of like, oh, geez, boss, like, I'm not sure you should have necessarily done that. But Lady Hamilton, she's enthusiastic. She's all in. She gives this toast. And Caracciolo's body has cannonballs strapped to its feet and is thrown in the bay like a mobster with concrete shoes. Fast forward a couple of weeks, King Ferdinand finally makes it to Naples. He is walking the deck of HMS Foudroyant. And then what happens? But the corpse of Francesco Caracciolo rises from the waves in a standing position right in front of the king. It turns out that a couple of rebels, a couple of Neapolitan pro-democracy rebels, dove down to the bottom of the bay, unstrapped the cannonballs, retrieved the man's body, then strapped it to like this trestle or wooden support system with a bunch of cork at the bottom of it, waited, then brought it back down underwater, waited for King Ferdinand to be walking the deck, and then released the corpse so that it bobbed up to the surface like a cork with Francesco Caracciolo standing up there. And everybody on the deck sees this seemingly supernatural thing. Like, that's clearly Francesco Caracciolo. Everybody knows him by face. He has just risen from the water. And don't forget, King Ferdinand is, while not mad in the same sense that his eldest brother is mad, like, he's unpredictable. He's not necessarily the most rational or disciplined of people. Nobody knows what he's going to do. How is he going to react to this? Fortunately, Lord Hamilton, the British ambassador to King Ferdinand, is on hand. And before King Ferdinand can say or do something that will just create lots of chaos, he says, "Oh, Your Majesty, clearly Caracciolo could not pass on until he had the opportunity to beg Your Majesty for his pardon." And okay, fortunately, situation diffused. Now, let's talk about the irregularities. And for the record, like, that story about Caracciolo rising from the waves, it is attested to from numerous sources. That is the thing that led me down this whole rabbit hole. I was reading a diary of a surgeon in Nelson's fleet, and the surgeon just happened to be on board, not aboard Foutroyant, but aboard a neighboring warship, and saw this happen and wrote it in his diary. And was just like, you would not believe what I just saw today. And I was like, okay, I don't believe it. That's nuts. Like, I have to go check this against some other sources. It's well attested. This seems to be for realsies what happened. Anyway, irregularities. There's a number of irregularities in the case. And again, there's no disputing that Caracciolo was guilty. And there's no disputing that the penalty for treason in Naples was death, right? Like, that's not what's at issue here. What's at issue is how the whole affair was carried out. And these irregularities plagued Nelson for the rest of his career. They were a blot on his reputation. As evidenced by all of his officers in the wardroom that night, who are just like, oh, geez, boss, I'm not sure you should have done that. Nelson and Caracciolo were friends. They had fought together. They had dined together. By the standards of the British upper class, that should have meant that Nelson accorded Caracciolo some extra privileges, right? He should have at least been courteous enough to offer Caracciolo a shave, or, I don't know, a lawyer. Also, in the whole like upper class thing, Caracciolo asked not to be hanged, but to be shot. Hanging is something you do for common criminals. For aristocrats and members of the upper class, you shoot them. And Nelson said, no, absolutely not. You are a traitor. You know, you will be hanged. You will not be shot. So that was also irregular. Of course, I would point out that, you know, it's precisely this sort of preferential treatment for the wealthy and well-connected that the French First Republic was so grumpy about in the first place. So, you know, there's kind of a system going on here. Anyway, but there was other weirdness here. From a Christian perspective, Nelson ought to have given Caracciolo 24 hours before killing him, so that he would have had a chance to compose his thoughts and repent. It was very important. You had to have at least 24 hours between sentencing and execution so that the convicted man could repent and maybe save himself from the fires of hell. He also, as a Christian, ought to have been given a Christian burial and buried in a churchyard instead of just thrown in the ocean like a dead mobster. He ought to, from a juridical perspective, Caracciolo ought to have been tried in a less prejudicial setting. And in fact, Caracciolo requested an appeal because there's no opportunity for, no chance of a fair trial here, right? Like, absolutely none. This is a kangaroo court. Even though the verdict was not in question, like, man deserves a fair trial. And in that vein, Nelson did not even speak Italian. And Caracciolo did not speak English. And Caracciolo did not get an interpreter, which implies that either Nelson literally did not hear a word or understand a single word that Caracciolo spoke in his defense, or that his words were translated by one of the Neapolitan officers who were judges, which is a clear conflict of interest. Let's see here. There's also a political concern. British warships are technically legally, and I will concede it is a bit more complicated than this, but technically legally, British warships are British soil. And it is no coincidence that Caracciolo was moved to a Neapolitan warship to be hanged, as opposed to being hanged on British soil. But given that, oughtn't he have been tried on Neapolitan soil as well? Isn't that kind of a weird conflict for him to be tried on British soil? That did not play well politically back home. And furthermore, this was only the beginning of a long series of anti-democratic purges that King Ferdinand carried out in Naples, which Nelson actively helped in. And that also did not play well politically back home. And furthermore, there were persistent rumors that the thing that made Nelson vote for immediate execution and cast the tiebreaker vote in that direction was undue influence by Lady Hamilton. It is known, it is unquestionable, that Lady Hamilton swayed Nelson's verdicts in other court martials, right? Like we have letters from, for example, a Marine who had been court-martialed in Naples, writing to Lady Hamilton saying, geez, Lady Hamilton, I sure heard that Admiral Nelson is real fond of you, because the affair was an open secret. Would you mind interceding on my behalf? Sincerely yours, a Marine. And Lady Nelson intervened, and that Marine got off with a much lighter sentence than he otherwise would have. So there's a suggestion that maybe the reason Caracciolo was immediately hanged is because Lady Nelson swayed the results. That also did not play well politically back home. So there's all this weirdness going on. And it's in the weirdness and the ambiguity and the weird irregularities in this case that you have the opportunity for adventure. So obviously you're going to want to fictionalize this to put this in your fictional RPG campaign setting. But you have a number of really colorful NPCs. You have Caracciolo, you have Nelson, you have Lady Hamilton, you have King Ferdinand, all of whom are kind of larger than life figures. All of whom have their own desires and wishes and wills. And if you put the PCs in an environment with with a bunch of NPCs who are based on these historical figures, and I mean the PCs, they don't have to be judges in the case or anything like that. All they have to be is people with enough clout, right, with enough influence or legitimacy that if they want to go talk to Lady Hamilton, she can't just throw them out. Right? She can't just say, no, get out of here. You are dirty commoners. I am Lady Hamilton. She has to at least say, that's very interesting. And then you could just throw the PCs into the situation and say, okay, what are your interests? So, for example, if you have a PC who is, to use a D&D example, he's the cleric. It may be very important to him that Francesco Caracciolo be given 24 hours and a proper burial. You might have a politically connected PC who's like, whoa, we cannot hold this. My patrons back in the Capitol will throw a fit if this show trial is held on this ship instead of that ship. You might have a PC who wants to do a favor for the king, and so is maybe able to convince one or two of the judges that, like, no, maybe you should change your vote to wait until you find out what the king wants. Wait until you find out what your King Ferdinand analog wants before we do anything. Maybe you have a PC who's really interested in getting a favor in having Lady Hamilton or your Lady Hamilton analog owing him a favor. Okay, cool. Maybe sway some of the judges in the opposite direction towards immediate execution. And just all of this weirdness all kind of pulls in different directions. And awesome, right? Now we have attention. Now we have desires for the PCs to go in and just start mixing it up and talking to people and finding out secrets and overhearing things and doing blackmail and trying to get political favors. And it's just this wonderful situation to drop your PCs into and just kind of see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were mentioning at the beginning of the episode, talking about a real history, adding layers and depth to, RPGs. If you slap this on players, I think most of them would lose their minds because there are so many different layers and so many different people playing against each other, which of course is what happens in real life. But, sadly, it doesn't happen a lot in our role-playing games because the game master can only hold, one or two NPCs in their head and before they start forgetting things or something. So having this whole situation is really crazy.
Yeah, and also, like, there's not actually that many NPCs, right? Like, there's kind of 4 significant NPCs, and one of them is the guy on trial. So to a certain extent, he doesn't count. And so really with 3 NPCs, you set up this really wonderful triangle of tension between them because they all want different things. And that then plays in if hopefully you have some PCs who want things. They're not just there to be like, all right, bring up the plot wagon, dump the plot on here, and I'll do whatever. Like if you have PCs who want things, who are actively charging after their own desires, their own motivations, then yeah, man, just thrust them into a complicated situation and let them want things and let them chase things.
Yeah. And I think your point there is really good, that hopefully the players want things and they need things, and either they need something from, the man on trial, they need something from, Lady Hamilton, they need something from Nelson, they need something from Ferdinand. And then they're tossed into this situation where if they, don't intervene, they're gonna, somebody's not going to be willing enough to listen to them, so they're trying to balance all of those things, like, oh my goodness, we need Lord Nelson's favor while he wants him executed, but we also need the king for something. How are we gonna juggle all these things?
Right. And then at the end of it, I would just kind of throw in the whole Caracciolo rising from the waves as a cherry on top, because that's just so bizarre.
That image, though, that is, I think that's something that can just be lifted by itself and put into different contexts and just freak people out. But in this context, it is really interesting. But I can see that being used as a hook in a number of different ways. So that is just awesome by itself almost. All right. Well, I mean, we've talked about this one now, for like 35 minutes?
Thereabouts, as we always do.
Yeah, exactly.
First one always goes real long.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about that one. We have a lot of different layers there, and people can, obviously, I think there are ways to use that in your fantasy game, your historical game, some other different settings, just because of the way the situation is kind of laid out there. So now, we'd like to cover two more. Hopefully, we can kind of get these in here today. What I thought was really interesting too, on your blog, you had another post about some ruins in what is modern day Kenya, but there's some questions about these ruins, isn't there?
Yeah. So the ruins are in an unfortunate state of preservation, which makes it hard to get certain answers about them. But these are the ruins of Unguana. They are on the coast of modern day Kenya, and they are part of a larger cultural complex about which we do know more than just specifically what we know at Unguana. So these are well, backing up to the dates here, because the dates are important. Unguana was a port. It was a port at the mouth of a river, and it was inhabited from roughly the year 1200 to the year 1600. It has been tentatively identified with a port sacked in the year 1505 by the Portuguese naval commander Tristan da Cunha, who is, just as a complete aside, he is my namesake's namesake. I'm Tristan Zimmerman. I am named for a man named Tristan Jones, who was not born with that name, but invented it as part of his fictionalization of his persona. And his fictional persona, he was not born in this context, but his fictional persona was born off the island of Tristan da Cunha in the South Atlantic, and the island of Tristan da Cunha was named for the Portuguese naval commander / explorer Tristan da Cunha. So anyway, that's my personal connection to this story. But in any case, what I'm getting at is with all this is that Unguana predates European interest in this part of East Africa by centuries, by many centuries. And then even after it was sacked by the Portuguese, persisted for about 100 years. It is a stone town. encircled by a stone wall enclosing an area maybe 300 meters by 600 meters, so call it 45 acres. It's right there on the beach. And it was probably an entrepot, right? This is a place where trade goods come downstream. They come down the Tana River and are kind of purchased by the merchants who live in Unguana, and then resold to merchants in the Indian Ocean. Because as we've discussed previously on this podcast, all through the Middle Ages, the Indian Ocean was just a thriving commercial zone with particularly Muslim merchants, but Malay and Arab and Persian merchants just going all over the Indian Ocean, trading with all these places. And Unguana was part of that big trading place. The people who lived in Unguana were probably ethnic Swahilis. They probably spoke Swahili or a closely related language, which they wrote with an Arabic script. And this is really interesting from our perspective as people who are, because Matt and I are Americans, and therefore, most of our schooling was done from a Eurocentric perspective. You might have encountered in the past, maybe in high school or somewhere else, mentions of Arabs encountered by European explorers in East Africa. These are the people that reference is talking about. They are not Arabs by ethnicity. They are Arabs by language and religion. They are Muslims. Their elites speak Arabic and also Swahili. They are absolutely African. They are unambiguously sub-Saharan Africans inheriting a sub-Saharan African cultural tradition, a sub-Saharan African linguistic tradition, but with kind of this Arabic-speaking elite class that is then tied into the larger Indian Ocean trading network. And unfortunately, that use of the word Arab to describe certain sub-Saharan African merchant traders has just stuck around and is real unexamined, and that is unfortunate. Anyway, that's a total aside. Anyway, so in Unguana, we've got two big mosques, two large so-called Friday mosques. They're big enough for the whole community to gather there for the Friday prayers, the most important prayer of the week on Fridays at noon. You'll note there are two Friday mosques because they kind of tended to fall into disrepair and then get refurbished at different times. So often there was only ever one Friday mosque in active use, which is, I just think, really interesting. There's a cemetery full of broken tombs. These tombs are opened by time. They're not opened by grave robbers. There's the earth in the cemetery is littered with potsherds because it's customary. It was customary to leave bowls of offerings for the dead, but of note, archaeologists have found that some of these potsherds are from the 20th century, which means that folks were coming out here very recently to leave offerings to their ancestors. Now, I mentioned that the ruins of Unguana are not in a great state of repair. Now, there are other ruins of Swahili towns that are part of the same cultural nexus that are in much better states of repair. I'm thinking here particularly of Gedi and Kilwa, both of which are well studied and just super, super cool. But Unguana has been largely taken over by the forest. The forest just runs right down to the beach. And if you look at this site on Google Maps and just look at the satellite imagery, you can barely tell that there's anything here because the forest has just taken over this super cool African pre-colonial ruined town. And that then, makes it just a really interesting setting because everybody's a sucker for, a ruined city that's been taken over by jungle. It's a trope for a reason. But also it contrasts in a thematic way really wonderfully with the kind of stone used to build Unguana. And that stone is called coral rag. Now, coral rag is a limestone that is made from the bodies of dead coral polyps. Now, as most of you at home are probably aware, corals are living things. Each individual little coral polyp builds kind of a calcium carbonate shell around himself. And they latch onto each other and they build all these shells, and live corals build on top of the empty shells of dead corals, and you just keep building up and up and up, and you create these giant limestone coral reefs that we all know and love. But as the coral reef climbs and gets taller and taller, it compresses the old coral beneath it, and it compresses and compresses and turns into something that we would recognize as being stone, right? It is actual limestone. And then you take that and fast forward that through geologic time, as tectonic shifts can sometimes cause the seafloor to rise and become land. And then these old coral beds can be quarried, and they can be quarried for their limestone. And that's what Unguana is built from. It is built from, metaphorically, the bones of dead animals. Coral animals, and they don't really have bones. They have little calcium carbonate shells. But really, this is a city, a ruined city, therefore metaphorically a city of the dead, made from the metaphorical bones of dead animals that is now being overtaken by the living forest. And I adore the thematic contrast there. And to me, this screams out, put me in a fantasy setting. For one, if possible, put me in a fantasy setting that acknowledges the pre-colonial sub-Saharan African cultural context that's going on here. That's just so very interesting, and I didn't really have a chance to get into, and I apologize for that. But I'm trying to keep us on time here. So put it in a fantasy setting and have it be a place that is warred over by fantasy representations of the living and the dead. And maybe that's necromancers versus druids. Maybe that is Ents versus ghosts. But you have this town that, the physical thing of the town itself is life battling death in a dead town. And to me, that's just absolutely incredible. I cannot get over how cool I think that is. There's a lot of other neat stuff about the setting. I haven't even touched on the fact that a medieval Swahili cultural hero is Fumo Liongo, is buried kind of just down the way from Unguana. And Fumo Liongo was just a super cool foundation hero among the Swahili people, and I'd love to be able to dig more into that. But I believe that Matt is gonna yell at me if I go any longer. So, Matt.
No, that's awesome, and I really do like your take. I mean, well, like you were saying, ruins are fascinating anyway. Just any ruin is fascinating, but to kind of to go the way you're going with it, I think is really fascinating, and kind of contrasting the living forest with the city of the dead is a really nice idea. And using that the city is built out of, things that were formerly alive is just it just adds even more to that. And of course, just removing it even farther, I've run a few campaigns where I've introduced, say in a sci-fi campaign where I introduced an entire planet that was a graveyard. The entire planet was just some ancient culture's graveyard, and use that to plant my player characters down on the surface of this world, and everywhere they step is the bones or the some ancient thing of a culture that they just don't even know or understand because it was so ancient in the cosmos.
Man, that's cool. That is cool stuff.
Yeah. So that kind of reminded me of this, and for kind of a fantasy world, or like what you're talking about, is really, really neat. And so yeah, I really enjoyed that. And yeah, we are going long on time, but these are all fascinating. And we do have another one that we were wanting to talk about. The Emissary to the Mongols. And I know we're like, we always overload people. I think these episodes are packed. So if people are, if you're running a game tonight, you're listening and you're running a game tonight, you can take any bits of all of these things and just throw them right into your game. And you should be good to go for, like, I don't even know, like, how many sessions do you think you could get out of some of this stuff? Like 20 sessions? I don't know. This is pretty cool stuff.
So, definitely from the Emissary to the Mongol stuff, you can get a lot of sessions out of.
Yeah.
But cool. Let's talk about this. So, I'm gonna, because we're running short on time, I'm gonna skip over a lot of the real important historical context involving how Europe, and specifically Catholic Europe, came into contact with the Mongol Empire. But I do need to point out, because it's real important to this story, that much of the Mongol Empire was Christian. This is something that I think is largely overlooked today. But just as today, Christianity can often be broken down into kind of Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant branches. And of course, that's an oversimplification. During the Middle Ages, Christianity could kind of be broken into Catholic, Orthodox, and the Church of the East. And the Church of the East was a theologically distinct church, just as, Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants are theologically distinct today, but also unambiguously Christian. And though not by population, by area, it was the largest Christian denomination in the Middle Ages, because it stretched from Lebanon to east to Mongolia, almost to Manchuria, and south, south to India. So it just covered this huge swath of land. And as a consequence, by the time of the Mongol conquests, large portions of the groups that made up Genghis Khan's army were Christian and had been Christian for generations. And then thrust that into the context of the Crusades, because the Crusades are happening at at the same time, simultaneously with the Mongol conquest. And so we are gonna look here at King Louis IX of France, who participated in a number of crusades. And of course, even as the Crusaders are battling with the Muslim world from the West, and by this point, because we're talking the 1200s, by this point the Crusaders are doing laughably poorly. Just like really embarrassingly badly, you guys. And Louis IX is no exception. He was really bad at things.
Now, a personal note: if our family genealogy is correct, he is some number of my direct great grandfather. So,
I am so sorry. I would not tell people that. He's not great at his job, is what I'm getting at. Well,
he had some issues. There's no doubt.
I understand he did some really good things domestically back in France, but really bad at crusading. Anyway, so while the Crusaders are trying to make war on the Muslim world from the West and failing at it, the Mongols are successfully making war on the Muslim world from the East. And Louis IX hears of a Mongol noble. By this point, the Mongol invasion is many decades old. And, the Mongol Empire is established. And Louis IX hears of a Mongol noble named Sartak, who is supposedly a pious Christian. And so Louis IX says, man, what I really need in order to make my crusade succeed, what I really need is to convince this Sartok guy that he should go on crusade with me. Because if we both go on crusade at the same time, like, look, the Mongols are clearly a lot better at warfare than we are. We'll win. We will win for the first time since the first crusade. And then everyone will think I'm nifty. So Louis sends this guy, a man named William of Rubruck, a Franciscan friar, who was part of the crusade. Louis sends William of Rubruck to the court of Sartok with this letter. And I will gloss over even more things, but the letter is basically a request written between the lines by inference of like, hey, Sartok, I hear you're a pious Christian. Wouldn't you like to come on crusade? And William is sent. He is sent to go talk to Sartok, and Sartok lives on a plain near the Caspian Sea in one of these mobile Mongol tent cities. And William gets to Sartok, and Sartok, for one, is not a Christian, though he does have a number of Christians in his court. Sartok is not a Christian, and also he does not even remotely have the authority to organize an alliance between Mongols and Catholic Europeans. And so he says, okay, well, William, you're going to need to go talk to my father, Batu. And Batu may be a name that some folks in the audience recognize because Batu is a real big deal in Mongol history. You'll need to talk to my father, Batu. He's up in the Ukraine. He's up in Ukraine. We're not supposed to say the Ukraine anymore. Ukrainians prefer that we drop the definite article. And of course, I'm more than happy to, because we should call people what they want to be called. You should talk to my dad, Batu. And William's like, well, I was just sent to go talk to you, sir. Like, I've been away from home for a really long time now. Can I go home? Absolutely not. You cannot go home. Take your letter to my dad, Batu. And so William has to trudge across the steppes to get to Ukraine. Says, hey, Batu, here's this letter. It's worth mentioning that William does not really understand the contents of the letter. He does not understand that this is a request for an alliance. He just thinks this is a letter talking about like friendship between nations. He does not understand the mission he has been sent on. And Batu's just like, ha, that's amazing. I do not even remotely have the authority to organize an alliance between Catholic European Crusaders and the Mongol Empire. You're going to need to go to Mongolia to talk to the emperor. And William's like, oh, please, sir, can I not? Absolutely not. You have to go to Mongolia. We're going to provide you an escort. You're going to go all the way to Mongolia. And so, okay, here we go, says William of Rubruck. It's this amazing travel story. This is happening at about the same time as Marco Polo, just to provide some context there. And except William does not want to do what he is doing. He has this interpreter who does not want to be doing this either. And the interpreter, like, William is now seeing this as an opportunity to like do some conversion, right? Like, okay, I'm gonna take some evangelism to the Mongols, convert them not to Church of the East Christianity, which I look down upon because of my Catholic preconceptions. I'm gonna convert them to real Catholic Christianity. And the interpreter, and you have to kind of read between the lines in William's writing, but I definitely see this as the interpreter saying, I am not going to help with this. That sounds like a great way for me to get myself killed. So every time William's like, okay, now I'm going to give a big sermon about how great Jesus is, the interpreter's just like, I don't know any of the Mongol words for this. Sorry, can't help you. Good luck with that. Even though they've been traveling together for a year. And if the interpreter wanted to learn some of the Mongol words for things like God or salvation, like, it would have had plenty of opportunities to ask. And we have all these, and I'm really doing this a disservice because I'm trying to do this fast, but like the party is the party, right? Because this is kind of an RPG adventure. The party is traveling through, like bandit infested lands, and William keeps trying to do these diplomatic overtures to these powerful Mongols, and the powerful Mongols keep kicking him down the road. William has this side project that he's doing all along the way that I think is really great from an RPG context, which is that he is aware of a band of Germans who've been enslaved during the Mongol invasion of Eastern Europe. And he wants to find out what's happened to them. So all along the way, as he's traveling across the steppe from Ukraine to Mongolia, he is inquiring of every Mongol that he meets, hey, man, like, do you know anything about these Germans? And, you know, sometimes he's told like, oh, they're over here, over there, over there. And unfortunately, he never gets a chance to link up with them. He finally finds out where they are once he's already passed where they are. And his Mongol escort is not interested in turning around. But from an RPG context, that's amazing because it's in a long trip. It's really helpful for the PCs to have something that they want to do. And we talked with the Francesco Caracciolo thing about the value of having PCs who want things. If there is a thing that the PCs want, letting them role play about how they are pursuing that goal as they are traveling really is a great way to make travel an interesting adventure, as opposed to simply a thing we have to get through on the way to the real adventure. You know, so if you have a PC who's just really interested in making and selling knives, cool, right? Like, here's a person who is interested in buying your knives. Do a role play. And now you have this role play scene. And during this role play scene, the PC has the opportunity to learn interesting and useful and productive information from the person they're selling their knives to. And all the business with Abdullah, the translator, is to me that is really interesting role play material. You've got some stuff with gifts where William of Rubruck, as a Franciscan, has an oath of poverty, and he feels that he cannot carry the sorts of fabulously wealthy gifts that you are expected to give to a sovereign when you arrive as a diplomat. And so every time he's talking to one of these Mongol lords, it's always like, hey, so where's the gifts? And now all of a sudden, William has to be like, oh, so let me explain my interpretation of my oath of poverty to you and why I don't have any gifts for you, sir. Sorry about that. Which to me is a really interesting role play encounter. And how you handle that then kind of has knock-on effects, because even as you're traveling, all these guys that you're meeting with, like, they're in communication with one another, and how you treat one and how one of them treats you then will have probably influence on how the second Mongol lord that you talk to treats, and you know, fold in this business with a project that your PCs are working with as they go. And then you can be using the translator to fold in complications, right? You can use a translator. In RPGs, I don't really find translation stuff enjoyable. I have played with people who think that language barriers are fascinating role play complications and love it. It's just generally not my jam. So I would replace Abdullah with something like an unreliable wagon driver, or a dog who's always getting into the stored food, or an AI assistant who's always playing video games when it should be doing AI assistant stuff. And what it is it's an opportunity to introduce complications. So you can turn kind of predictable encounters, you know, hey, what do you know? A bandit attack. How surprising. How interesting. Well, you throw in an unreliable wagon driver who's all of a sudden driving his wagon in a wildly unhelpful direction, or an AI assistant who is not activating the automated turrets that it really should be activating. All of a sudden, it turns a predictable encounter into a tense and memorable encounter. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's so much here that you can kind of explore because obviously you touched on, like a long journey and different aspects there. Some really interesting things there, I think, because, a lot of times I'll hear online, there's problems with long journeys, and obviously there's different ways to handle them, because sometimes, and I think you kind of mentioned it as well, sometimes you're like, oh, our party has to go to the lost silver mine in the mountains, and that's 500 miles away. Well, if that's all they're doing, right? Well, you can just wave your hand and have them be there, but if that's the adventure. But, using the trip as part of the adventure, I think is where long journeys and things like that can be really interesting, and giving them a long goal plus, short goals that they're interested in or things that they can accomplish while they're working towards their main goal. I think that is really cool. And I do like your idea of working in the different complications in that. Just, I guess, like maybe just a couple things, just thinking, the first one would be, I could see some player revolt if they get to a place and then the monarch says, no, you have to go someplace further. I could see some players being like, oh, you're just baiting us and taking us along. How would you solve that a little bit?
So I would lean into it. I would say, cool, man. Like, I'm here to run the campaign that you want to play. If you think that it is a bunch of BS, that we came all this way and you claim you don't even have the authority to respond to our query, cool, we're not going to go any further. Like, awesome. If that's the campaign you want to play, like, let's play that. I would love to play the campaign where you have now insulted, let's say you got through Sartak, okay, and you get to Batu, and Batu's like, oh, sorry, or your fictionalized Batu equivalent, sorry, you've got to go all the way to Mongolia to talk to the emperor, and the party says, no way, man, do you have any idea how far Mongolia is? And in real history, William of Rubruck had to cross the steppe, the endless steppe, in winter, which is insane. And like, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to France. We're turning right back around. We're not even going to the Middle East. We're going to France. Because we're done with this. Like, cool. Now you have angered Batu. Batu is insulted. He is also angry at King Louis because you're there with a letter from King Louis IX, or your fictional equivalent. So now Batu, who was previously perfectly happy to sit in Ukraine and enjoy the fruits of the rich grasslands of Ukraine and all the good stuff he's enjoying there, like, all of a sudden he's all revved up to reinvade Europe. Like, yeah, oh, those that Catholic monarch King Louis IX, ooh, he's really insulting me. Like, great. Because now what we have a campaign is a campaign that's not imposed by the DM upon the players. It is a campaign that is a natural consequence of the decisions that the players have made. And everybody always enjoys that more, right? Like, everybody always enjoys the stories that result from the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I think that is a really good way to kind of use that as well. Because I think, I don't know, I think there is, but I mean, I guess there could be something to, like Batu or the equivalent of just saying, no, you have to go. And here are my, 1,000 troops that are just going to escort you there. And that puts the players, of course, into a weird situation too. Either they go or they try to sneak away because they can't take on 1,000 troops or something like that.
Yeah, I would not do 1,000 troops. I would do 6 troops.
6. Okay.
Or depending on the power level of the troops involved, maybe I would do 10 so that, like, the party is not going to try anything right now here in the 10th city of Batu, but once we're a week out, Now we try something. Now we try to sneak away. And if we fail at sneaking away, then, now we're in a big fight and, now we killed them. So sooner or later, probably sooner rather than later, somebody's going to stumble upon their frozen bodies on the step and know, those villainous player characters, look what they have done. They are so perfidious. And now, you're riding to try to stay ahead of the Mongols pursuing you who want to hunt you down. And again, adventure that's arising from the consequences of your own actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, if you're trying to go back to Europe, you have to go right past the city again, right?
Right. You have to go right past Batu's Orda.
Yeah. So that's really good. I like all of that, actually. I like all of that. So yeah, just another situation that is just filled with different ideas where people can take them right into their own campaigns or take little bits of them here and there to spice up some, maybe a situation they already had going, but just some little things that they can take and add into something. So I think it's really cool. And it's really cool to hear you kind of break all of these down. Let's just remind everybody, where can people find you and your articles?
So if you head to moltensulfur.com, you can find me there. You can also just Google Molten Sulfur, Molten Sulfur RPG, Molten Sulfur Press, Molten Sulfur blog, whatever. It'll all turn me up. On Twitter, I'm at Molten Sulfur. You can search for Molten Sulfur Press on Facebook. And if I just say the words Molten Sulfur often enough, you will know that I, Tristan Zimmerman, am the Molten Sulfur guy, and Google will get you there.
All right. And as always, I'll put links in the show notes for this episode at dissects.com. So anybody listening can head over there and find those links. All right. Well, Tristan, just an amazing, again, another awesome episode with tons of stuff. Like I usually am fond of saying, it's just like if you're listening to this and you're running some campaigns and sessions and you can't get anything from these episodes, I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you should think of a new hobby, because these are just like packed with information that can be used in fantasy, Cthulhu. It can be used in sci-fi. They can be used in anything. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's always a delight.
All right, guys, there you have it. Oh, my goodness. Every time Tristan comes onto the show, I learn a ton about history. It is so fascinating to me just to hear some of these topics that Tristan is writing about and to get to talk with him about them and how to use them in our games is amazing. So, as I mentioned, I have provided links in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. You can find Tristan, his blog, where he writes about folklore and history and all of these topics like the ones we touched on today. You can also learn more about his role-playing game and his Kickstarter, so please check those out. Now, if you would like something free, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in the world of Dice Geeks. All right, guys, I mentioned at the top, and I know it might be getting old, but if you could support the show in some way, that would be awesome. Like, rate, review, subscribe, head over to patreon.com/dicegeeks. Whatever you could do would be awesome. It is an honor that you would listen to me each and every Wednesday. I thank you so much. Until next time, keep gaming.